Howdy, everybody. Thanks for joining me here for another members exclusive part three in the Atlantis series. Um, Again, welcome all of you new members and those who've been around since the series started. Just an update on what I plan going forward. Like I've already stated, these videos will sit in the members only area for 2 weeks and then the videos will become public. Um, I'll have a members only live stream, um, members and mods at the end of every month. And along with that, we'll be doing a live discussion of probably the final article for this series. So we'll do a live stream with the mods and the members, and we'll talk about the final episode, an article, my thoughts on the subject of the month. This month it's Atlantis. Next month it's going to be Lemuria, what that is, what that meant, its transitory periods, how it blended with South America, North America, Central America. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And thank you for subscribing. It means a lot. That's the beginning of you know, beginning of a new venture as far as material and presenting strategies. And, not everyone's for that. And people complain about a paywall. But like I said, it'll be available to non-members, but that live stream and the final talk will not be. So I appreciate you all very much, and those who watch this 2 weeks from now after it goes public. I appreciate you very much too. And I was just going to have members only videos, but I decided just to have it be on a delay. That way everyone can see this series down the road. And I appreciate your views and your time, and I certainly don't want to waste it. So let's jump right in. So, as you can see by the title, The Lost Atlantis Discovered in Africa. This article is from 1913, Atlanta, Georgia. Fantastic article. Great correlations here. If you've heard me talk about Atlantis before, I've postulated, so many different locations. But the reality was, Atlantis was all over the realm. There were, quote, outposts everywhere. Yeah, whether or not it was in the Atlantic or not, there's a lot of people that say it was. There's a lot of people that say it wasn't, but there are remnants found in Africa. There are remnants found in Central America, Florida, um, the southwest of America, as we've stated already, and South America. And we won't have enough time in this 4-part series to cover all those things, but we'll do kind of a recap, and I'll share some of my opinions at the end of this series. So it's the 10th. This video is for the second week, even though it's the third episode, because I decided to do one episode before June started. So there'll be 5 episodes for Atlantis, which is good because there's a lot of material. I'm sorry, there'll be 4 episodes, but this is coming out early. So this will be for the technically second week, if that makes sense, because the first week was just 3 days. So episode 3 of 4, the final episode of the week or of the month, will be our live. But yeah, it's everywhere, and the maritime race and the transition to Lemuria will be really interesting. So stay tuned for that. But this is a big one, so let's get right into it. I appreciate you all very much. Here we go. We're going to share screen. I'm going to dip out. Full presentation. Okay, is it showing me zooming in here? It is not. Okay. It did this before, and I'm glad I noticed. For some reason, my PDF viewer, if it's tabbed on anything else, it will not zoom properly. So at least we're figuring that out. Appreciate your patience. Here we go. Like I said, April 6th, 1913, Atlanta, Georgia. The lost Atlantis discovered in Africa. The noted German explorer tells of his remarkable discoveries among the strange Yorubas of the west coast of Africa and why he believes he found there the remains of the legendary lost continent. We'll look at the pictures before we jump in. This is a little map here showing Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic. This right here says drawing of two masks in the possession of the Yorubas, showing an entire absence of Negroid characters. Forbinus thinks the models for them were ancient Atlanteans. Now, this is really interesting because you find masks like this in Florida, you find masks like this in the Mississippi Valley, and you find them in Central and South America. These um, There were myths that the Aztecs were brought to Tenochtitlan from Florida by, quote, Phoenicians who looked like this, the maritime men. Very interesting. So remember that. We'll get into that as we get farther along in the series. Here it says to the right, bronze heads from the Yoruba race in Africa, which Professor Forbinus believes are relics of Atlantis. Scarification, the scarring of the skin, which is still predominant in many African tribes. And it was, believe it or not, it existed here in North America among, quote, Aboriginal tribes of North America. And they were dark skinned as well, long before the, quote, African slave trade. Just like the Olmecs, there's scarification that exists in the Central and South America as well. The history of scarification is incredibly interesting, and we will get into that in this article. To the left, sculptured portal of the palace of the Prince of Yubo, showing an un-African character of the ornamentation. That's this little script here. Very interesting. And now we're going to get into the article. The leader of the official German expedition to the interior of Africa, Professor Leo Forbinus, claims to have discovered remains of the lost Atlantis in the western part of Africa. He announced this fact at a late lecture in the German colonial office when the Kaiser was present. Kaiser Wilhelm, immediately after the lecture upon being presented to Forbinus, urged him to continue his work in Africa, promising the royal patronage and support. Now, this is very interesting. Okay. Kaiser Wilhelm, man, he was into some deep stuff. And he was a big radium guy. The transitory period here, you'll find a lot of overlaps with the Thule Society and Atlantean themes, advanced ancient technology. It's like Indiana Jones here in Kaiser Wilhelm. He was funding a lot of these Indiana Jones types, and I'd say Leo Forbinus was one of these men. In his first expedition to this wonderful district and its capital, which he finds to have been named Elife, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Ilife. Forbinus brought back an enormous quantity of statues, masks, ornaments, and pottery, proving the wonderful civilization of the people he had found. If Forbinus had indeed discovered any remains of Atlantis or of its civilization, he will have solved one of the oldest and most puzzling of all historical problems. The story of Atlantis was related first by Plato, the Greek philosopher, who told a most enchanting tale of a wonderful western land, which he called Atlantis, far out in the Atlantic Ocean, where wealth, peace, and civilization had prevailed for many ages. This tale has been repeated by many writers since that time, and expeditions were fitted out in ancient and modern times to research for this fabled land. It is even a question whether Columbus was not actually in search of Atlantis when he sailed west. Amazing. That's a really powerful line there. There's a lot of evidence to support that he absolutely was in search of Atlantis, and some of his translators would really carry for that effect. Um, ancient quote Hebrew, Etruscan, Finnish, block Hebrew. The overlays are powerful, but he had these translators with him. He was also aware that many of the native, quote, aboriginals of Central America and even North America spoke or were familiar with ancient Hebrew. So even went as far as to say the lost tribes were dispersed from the falling of Atlantis, kind of the Atlantis was Israel concept. Some have believed that Central America's civilization has developed by the Incas really came from the lost Atlantis, and Venus appears to share this idea. Now remember, we talked about the Incas warring with the Chimus Indians of the Great Wall of South America in Peru, and the connections there are really interesting. They tie in with the Olmec and the Olmec's history of the Red Land. Um, Again, more people telling a similar story that they came from a um, advanced civilization after some cataclysm. They were dispersed, kind of a Babel overlay as well. By Professor Leo Forbinus, chief of the German imperial expedition to the interior of Africa, to find a populous, well organized, and highly civilized race in the heart of Africa was most surprising after all the work of the predecessors in this field of exploration. But it is nevertheless true that in West Africa I did find the race of the Yorubas in the remarkable city of Ilif, seeming almost as if I had awakened in the center of some ancient, highly civilized, and progressive nation. The people are not Negroid in feature, color, or characteristics. The color of the skin is almost yellow. They are clever, gifted, and display a power of organization and artistic ability which is altogether un African. If anything, there appear to be traces of degeneration from some very great civilization now partly lost. The degeneration may be due to the introduction of the practice of slavery and human sacrifices to the gods. Absolutely. Now, this is like what we talked about with the Aztecs and the pre-Mayan. Mayan seems to have been a mixing up of Olmec, and that um, the people that followed them and chased them to the south um, brought with them human sacrifice. And the Scythian Tartar overlays here are very interesting. But when we talk about buried civilization on top of buried civilization, that's what we find in Mexico. I can hardly give an adequate account of all the wealth of art, treasures, of the thoroughgoing organization and modes of living, government, and religion, and the ancient traditions universally current, which appear to go far toward proving that here is a very ancient civilization indeed. One of their favorite traditions is the one of creation. Once upon a time, there was no earth. There was only ocean, the sea, a water that was spread out everywhere. Above was Olorun, Olorun, the Orisha of heaven, and Olokun, the Orisha of the sea, were both old. Everything was in them. Olorun had two sons. The elder was called Orishala. Now you'll see a lot of overlays here. Like these words almost seem like Finnish or Swedish. The elder, yeah, okay. The younger, Adudua. Olorun. Okay, excuse me for 1 second. I gotta sneeze. Oh, my apologies. And again, I want to say thank you to the people who reached out and try to give me some good advice for the allergy management. But this has been a lifetime ailment, and believe me, I've tried. all the vitamins you can imagine. Bee pollen, different types of honey, teas. I live in one of the most overbearing pollen districts in the entire world, believe it or not. And the month of May through mid June is rough. So, again, apologize. Okay, the elder was called Orishala, the younger Ordudua. Olorun called to Orishara, give him the earth. He gave him a hen with 5 fingers. He said to him, arise now and make of Akuan the earth. Orishata, Orisha went. On the way, Orisha found palm wine. Orisha began to drink the wine and became drunken. Then he fell asleep. Olorun saw this. Then Olorun called to Udundua and said to him, your elder brother has made himself drunken on the way down. Do you go, take the sand and the hen with the 5 fingers, and make the earth out of oakum? Odudua went. He took the sand, he went and laid it upon the sea. He placed the hen with the 5 fingers thereon. The hen began to scratch and scatter the sand and pushed the water aside. The place where this happened was Ilif, around which the sea first flowed. Ordudua was the first king who ruled over the land of Ilif. The sea, Olokun, became smaller and smaller and ran into a small hole, and then into a smaller hole, out of which man may not draw the divine water, so much that it never exhausted. It is called Osha. Orisha was, however, very angry that he did not bring about the creation of the earth, and he began a war against Odudua. They fought with each other for a long time, but afterwards here was peace. They both went upon the earth and were never before seen again by man. I also found that the Yorubas, for so these people call themselves, believe in 16 gods or lightning flashes of the great thunder god, their chief divinity. And isn't it funny that I was just mentioning the Finnish kind of Swedish Nordic overlays in the words here, and they're already talking about their chief god as a lightning god. Plasma, lightning flashes of the great thunder god, their chief divinity, and that these 16 express the full power of Odu. This belief may be compared with that of the Etruscans, who also divided the heavens into 16 sections, over each of which a divinity presided. Now, this is great because we're going to finish off this Atlantean series with some Etruscan Phoenician overlays in Central America. I found also a sword god, compatible to the Roman Mars. The name of the sacred city Ilif is examined by the natives to be the house of palm seed, and here is the great palace. Here and there in the city are isolated holy palm trees, but the buildings are irregular and usually covered with a thatch of leaves. One peculiarity strikes every visitor: the extreme ceremonialism of the inhabitants, for whether it be a bow or a greeting or kneeling or placing the forehead to the earth before a prince, all is done with the great reverence and the fixed solemnity of the ages of custom. The people wear their clothing as if it was part of them, and the other Yorubas freely admit that the inhabitants of Ilif are different from themselves, saying they are as yellow as the kukuruku. Kukuruku. It's like Kukulkan, and the overlaps with the Peruvian race too, guys. It is very easy to recognize the nobility among the inhabitants of the city, for they wear no ornaments, something very strange in West Africa, or a line is drawn under each eye. Only these are permitted to visit the most holy place of Ilif. The massive walls of the palace of Oni strike every beholder as wonderful, especially here. The front is imposing, looking out over a broad open place. The present Oni, or prince, is a young man between 20 and 30 who has been ruling since 1910. He says little, but holds his court in the palace, receiving the worship of his people, surrounded by his Ilari attendant priests. The organization of the religion is remarkable, with its prelates and patriarchs, 17 princes of the church in all. But what best proves the old organization and high civilization of the people of Ilith is the mass of remains of ancient times. No, that's of the people. Where did it jump to? But what proves the old organization and high civilization of the people of Ilith is the massive remains of ancient times which were brought to light. Okay. The natives hold that Ilith is the oldest city in the world, and this means at least their world. Here the people come to worship, and here are found clay and bronze relics of the past, which astonish the European who expects to find only the rude and the crude in Africa. In the shrines are stone images of various ages and degrees of perfection, and monoliths which are not unlike those found all over Europe. The hair is straight, showing no trace of Negroid character on many statues, and the features are not at all African. Elephant tusks, all carved, are called scepters of God by the natives, who have forgotten their origin. Now, the carving of ivory is incredibly interesting, and it leads back again to the Atlantean origins. The Etruscans were some of the first people to do this, and the Phoenicians obviously were trading elephants all over the world. The old workmen were most skillful, for they handled quartz artistically, carving it into all kinds of figures. Now, crystal carving, huge overlays with Atlantis. Big nod here. They knew time and how to measure it, for from the position of some of the monoliths, it is plain that they were used as sun clocks. They believed that the god of the sea, Olokun, did not live there any more, but had taken up his residence on their hill, and they made a great bronze image of him. They brought rich offerings to this god, and other divinities were set up, especially Shango. Shango, the thunder god, Shango. Many gifts were showed under this, and the other divinities, especially the glass pearls, which the inhabitants of the sacred city had learned how to manufacture in great quantities. The advance in the art of terracotta, big nod there, terracotta, you guys, making is best exemplified by the diadem of the god Olokun, as perfect as any of the ancient or modern world has produced. This takes us back to uh, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, ancient terracotta in unbelievable, highly advanced uses. Another most important discovery I made was the iron was freely used for ornamentation, showing that the worshippers and makers of these idols were then passing through the Iron Age, and that they knew how to handle the ore and the metal, just like Central America and North America. In all in all of my discoveries made in Ilif and the neighborhood from 1909 to 1912, I found no evidence that the civilization had grown up here. In other words, the development of the arts does not appear. Yeah, these are people who migrated after some cataclysm. There are no earlier types of pottery or scripture. All are apparently of the same period and displaying the same artistic facility. All that does appear is a process of degeneration in modern times. This sounds just like every other civilization built on top of a more advanced civilization. They may have some of their stories, they may have some of the technology, but it's all in a lesser form. The art remains found in Ilif and in the neighborhood all point to a remarkable completeness of type and finish, a powerful unity and perfection of characteristics and independence in style, which cannot be accounted for save as imported. As this art appears near the Atlantic and may be termed Atlantic art in a real historic sense. Whence came this wonderful art? This culture that required ages for the full development found at Ilif. If anyone were to discover some of the European colonies in Africa, he would have no doubt or difficulty in concluding that the arts there found, whether this colony was founded by the French or that by the Germans. In the same way, the discoverer may assert without fear of dispute that the wonderful ancient civilization of the Yorubas And the ideas of creation, the social laws and the formations of clans, the architecture and manufactures brought to so high a point of perfection were an independent development, especially as there is nothing in the African culture at any time that would have made these developments possible. The mountain of the gods of the inhabitants of Ilith with the 16 divinities is as high above all African ideas of religion and is the art found in that city. The people themselves prove that this culture has not been introduced to them, but that it has been produced by them. It is native to them and they are native to it. The resemblance of the art and ideas of the Yorubas with many of the Etruscan ideas can hardly be accidental. It is not difficult to imagine the possibility of the Etruscan culture coming through the Pillars of Hercules and finding its way to the Atlantic coast of Africa. Now, again, I've talked about the Etruscans endlessly, and we're going to get into the Etruscans in Mexico in part three. Actually, we'll cover another African article in part three, and part four will be the Etruscan and the origins in Mexico and the Phoenician history of the Etruscans. They were the original founders of Rome after a cataclysm. Okay, the god Janus, which is Neptune and Mars. Okay, his two faces, Neptune and Mars. Okay, the Atlantean god Noah founded Genoa and landed his ark in Italy. The Etruscans begin. The Rizza blah blah blah. It is not difficult to imagine the possibility of the Etruscan culture coming through the pillars. Yep, sorry, covered that. Of course, must not have. Of course, this must have occurred in very ancient times for the remains to have the character they now possess, and for the degenerative process to have gone as far as it has in the Ilif country. There are many indications of similarity, and none in characteristic with that of the roof construction and the very verandas and decorations found alike in the Etruscan ruins and in those of Ilith. In weapons of war, the anthropologists find clear indications of borrowing, for they are most characteristic, especially the bows. While almost every ancient nation used a bow, yet in the stringing of the bow lies the mark of peculiarity, and here the Yorubas and the Etruscans agree again. In the resemblance of weaving apparatus, there is similar agreement through the Yorubas as the implements of the Africans around them. In their temple worship, the Yorubas show a great difference from all the African tribes and nations. The construction of the buildings is more permanent and elaborate, and they are especially devoted to the burnt offering, something almost unknown to Africa generally. The manufacture of glass pearls and the handling of nature's pearls almost point to a peculiar civilization unknown to Africa. Now, we've been covering this, and we're going to get into this a lot more in the Mississippi Valley with these pearls and the sacredness of the pearl. Okay, it ties into Atlantis, and we're going to cover that. Excuse me. Whence and how came this remarkable people to the west coast of Africa? As to the time and the art remains prove without question that it must go back to very remote ages, called rather indefinitely ancient times. According to Herodotus, who is being accepted more and more as a truth teller as the years pass by, the Phoenicians passed through the Pillars of Hercules between Africa and Europe, where Gibraltar stands, and not daring to sail out upon trackless Atlantic Ocean, followed the west coast of Africa, planting colonies in the most favorable spots. But this would hardly account for the colonists of Yoruba, for they went far back of any period that the Phoenicians might have covered. Had the Carthaginians known of this land, it certainly would be mentioned in ancient literature somewhere, but no such notice has been made. It is therefore plain that the time of the Phoenicians, the Yoruba settlement was cut off entirely from European and Asiatic knowledge, forgotten if ever known. Now, this is great because this puts a little bit more of the basis for the Etruscan Phoenician relationship and the ancientness of the Etruscans. And, what we stated earlier with Noah and the flood and the cataclysm and the repeopling of our repopulating of the Mediterranean from a people from the West. Another very important fact is that the Yorubas knew in very remote ages many arts and had developed them to a higher stage than the Phoenicians ever reached, which makes it impossible for the Phoenicians to have given birth to the Yoruban colony. There is only one nation old enough and with similar arts to resemble the Yorubas closely, and that is the Etruscans. Now, the Etruscans, again, Phoenician. Um, I'm going to do a very amazing video and describe to you the Phoenicians, but the Phoenicians weren't a people, they were a secret society, and the Etruscans were adopted into that. There was a priest class where magnetism and maritime law were the traits of the highest. Etruscans had reached their blah, blah. When then explanation is a problem, Etruscans are as much strangers to Europe as the Yorubas are to Africa. Both must have come from some great Western race or people. Yeah, they came from the Gulf of Mexico. And no other explanation as yet appears that both the Yorubas and the Etruscan originally came from the fabled land of Atlantis, that wonderful land that once stood in the Atlantic Ocean, but has long sunk beneath the waves, leaving its traces in these two remarkable races, one in West Africa, the other in Europe. The legend of the Yorubas pointing to the sea as the origin of all things suggests strongly that they were originally an island people, and this legend must have been brought with them to Africa by the first immigrants from Atlantis. It is more than possible that some of the immigrants reached the shores of America, giving birth to that puzzling civilization which has not been explained satisfactorily by anyone. So, that here are the three angles of the triangle: West Africa, Etruria, and Central America. Absolutely. That is the triangle. And at the center of this triangle may once have been the great Atlantis itself, or if there was no such place, there was some great primeval race, at any rate, living somewhere, which gave rise to these far scattered but perfect civilizations, closely resembling each other, yet differing in the course of ages, which brought more of a degeneration than progress. Unbelievable article, lots of correlations, and we're going to get into more of the Etruscan relations in further episodes. It's going to be awesome. The Finnish of Finland, the Baltic, the Swedes, who were the real Vikings. Yeah, this wasn't a group of skin color. That's why the Phoenicians are important. It was a sacred brotherhood of magnetism, the Magi, and the compass and navigation were sacred to these people, and we're going to correlate a lot of this back to Atlantis. Yeah, so thank you so much, members and non-members who are hearing this down the road. I appreciate you all very much. I hope you're enjoying the series. Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.